today and tomorrow. Our mission is to energize an Africa that works with our partners in the world to mobilize investment, build physical and digital networks, and shape a more progressive, sustainable, prosperous, and inclusive future for the mother continent.
Let's work together to deliver justice for Africa and unleash its full potential.
The Global Africa Business Initiative is designed to accelerate the promotion of business.
Africa is a growing continent. It's the continent of energy, vibrancy, and creativity.
When there's a common position from heads of state, from finance ministers, from civil society networks, that is power.
I'm extraordinarily optimistic, and I'm very excited about the possibilities that lie ahead.
We all in this room and outside this room, we all have the same destination. We want a green planet.
We are realizing the promise of this great continent which is shaped like a question mark, but actually has the answer for the world.
But it starts with us. The people in the African continent, we need to speak with one voice. The time to talk about potential is over. Move it to opportunity, move it to investment.
Shipping, road infrastructure, power, rail, seaports, rail networks. All of these are lacking in Africa.
So let's focus on what we control. We control our regulations. We control how ambitious we can be. And we control how we treat our investors.
Solidarity, solidarity, solidarity. That is what Africa and the Caribbean and Latin America and Asia and the Pacific are doing across the world.
The thing to do for Africa is to begin to commercialize sports. Right. There are so many opportunities that can come as soon as we begin to do that.
What are the three most important technology priorities for Africa? In my opinion, I'll tell you what they are. Electricity, electricity, electricity.
We are tired of being nature rich and cash poor, and we're going to change that.
And so there has to be a significant change in how Africa addresses its own commodities.
The cost of doing business in Africa is coming down, and that's kind of what's going to galvanize the opportunity for Africa in aggregate and individually.
The agricultural transition and the food system transition represent a potential $150 billion market by the year 2030.
We have young Africans in Kigali, in Rwanda, in Kenya, in Johannesburg, in Lagos, who are at the cutting edge of digital innovation.
You know, we ourselves as young Africans are leading a lot of these innovations ourselves. We know where the capital should be best deployed because these are our homes. We also have a sense of how our capital can be best used across the entire capital stack.
We need to tap into that youth because we already know the youngest youth population by 2050 is going to be on the African continent.
Our mission really has become to also promote gender equality.
We've got to demonstrate an agility. We've got to tell our young women that they were born into CEO roles and have them start to operate from that place.
When we talk about unstoppable, there's no question that we are moving in that direction.
You heard it from the experts. In the next 20 years, for Africa, AI, innovation hubs, talent, clean water from the atmosphere, but mostly driven by good governance and leadership. So give it up for the panel, the excellent panel.
This movement is ours. This is our narrative. This is our leadership. This is our path. The real power is in AFRICA, is it not?
Africa is unstoppable.
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 Unstoppable. Unstoppable.
That's the story we want, is that when everyone points to Africa, they point to our success.
Amazing, amazing, amazing video. If you're just joining us, welcome, welcome. I see that a lot of people are still, joining in. Sylvia, hold on, we'll play the video once again. And just to allow a few more people to join. Yes, so please go ahead and play the video again.
welcome to the second edition of the Global Africa Business Initiative flagship event, Unstoppable Africa, on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. Today and tomorrow, our mission is to energize an Africa that works with our partners in the world to mobilize investment, build physical and digital networks, and shape a more progressive, sustainable, prosperous, and inclusive future for the mother continent.
Let's work together to deliver justice for Africa and unleash its full potential.
The Global Africa Business Initiative is designed to accelerate the promotion of business.
Africa is the growing continent. It's the continent of energy, vibrancy, and creativity.
When there's a common position from heads of state, from finance ministers, from civil society networks, that is power.
I'm extraordinarily optimistic, and I'm very excited about the possibilities that lie ahead.
We all in this room and outside this room, we all have the same destination. We want a green planet.
We are realizing the promise of this great continent which is shaped like a question mark, but actually has the answer for the world.
But it starts with us. The people in the African continent, we need to speak with one voice. The time to talk about potential is over. Move it to opportunity, move it to investment.
Shipping, road infrastructure, power, seaports, rail networks, all of these are lacking in Africa.
So let's focus on what we control. We control our regulations. We control how ambitious we can be. And we control how we treat our investors.
Solidarity, solidarity, solidarity. That is what Africa and the Caribbean and Latin America and Asia and the Pacific are doing across the world.
The thing to do for Africa is to begin to commercialize sports. Right. There are so many opportunities that can come as soon as we begin to do that.
What are the three most important technology priorities for Africa? In my opinion, I'll tell you what they are. Electricity, electricity, electricity.
We are tired of being nature rich and cash poor, and we're going to change that.
And so there has to be a significant change in how Africa addresses its own commodities.
The cost of doing business in Africa is coming down, and that's kind of what's going to galvanize the opportunity for Africa in aggregate and individually.
The agricultural transition and the food system transition represents a potential $150 billion market by the year 2030.
We have young Africans in Kigali, in Rwanda, in Kenya, in Johannesburg, in Lagos, who are at the cutting edge of digital innovation.
You know, we ourselves as young Africans are leading a lot of these innovations ourselves. We know where the capital should be best deployed because these are our homes. We also have a sense of how our capital can be best used across the entire capital stack.
We need to tap into that youth because we already know the youngest youth population by 2050 is going to be on the African continent.
Our mission really has become to also promote gender equality.
We've got to demonstrate an agility. We've got to tell our young women that they were born into CEO roles and have them start to operate from that place.
When we talk about unstoppable, there's no question that we are moving in that direction.
You heard it from the experts. In the next 20 years, for Africa, AI, innovation hubs, talent, clean water from the atmosphere, but mostly driven by good governance and leadership. So give it up for the panel, the excellent panel.
This movement is ours. This is our narrative. This is our leadership. This is our path. The real power is in Africa, is it not?
Africa is unstoppable.
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 Unstoppable. Unstoppable.
That's the story we want, is that when everyone points to Africa, they point to our success.
Thank you. For those just joining us, good morning, good afternoon, good evening once again, from wherever it is you're joining us from. This is the Global Africa Business Initiative, GABI, online press conference for its flagship event, Unstoppable Africa. I said earlier that the Global Africa Business Initiative is the preeminent platform dedicated to accelerating business, trade, and investment across the African continent. Thank you, Sylvia. Their mission is clear. They're on a journey to energize an Africa that collaborates with partners to mobilize investment, build digital, physical, and other infrastructure, and create a prosperous African continent. Before the break, which we just had so that we'll have more people join us, I'd wanted to introduce Sanda Ojiambo, the Assistant Secretary General and CEO of the United Nations Global Compact, who is here to share information and answer your questions about GABI and its flagship event, Unstoppable Africa, which is scheduled to take place in a few weeks, by the way, the 25th and 26th of September in Cipriani, New York. Please do well to share any questions you have in the Q&A box on your screen. So at this point, I would invite Sanda to please come introduce GABI to us. Sanda, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Rosemary, and to everybody, greetings, salut, salam alaikum, habari, I'm from Kenya. Just great to have you all here and really focusing the lens on Africa. As Rosemary mentioned, I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact. It's an organization within the United Nations that is pretty unique because we deal with the private sector as our core stakeholder. As you know, much of the United Nations deals with governments or member states, as we call them. We uniquely focus on the private sector because we believe it's such a core part of the development agenda. But more importantly, the private sector drives economies. And that's really why we're here. So really thrilled to take this time to talk to you about the work that we're doing, to talk about the Global Africa Business Initiative. I'll refer to it as GABI, which is a platform that we established in 2022 to really reshape the African narrative. The video clip that we went through twice ended with the Deputy Secretary General talking about it's our narrative, our path, and our leadership. So, building with the momentum that I'm sure you've heard all around as media people, that it's really time for a renaissance for Africa, placing Africa at the table, making sure, as some have said at the very recent Africa CEO Forum, that Africa is at the table and not at the menu. We have fully embraced that because we firmly believe that Africa is unstoppable. And I will unpack that as we go along. GABI is a platform. It is not a series of convenings or events. It's truly an action platform, as I'll talk about a little bit later, aiming to bring together governments, private sector, civil society, investors, philanthropy, friends of Africa, truly seize the moment and invest in Africa. Many are doing business in Africa, but not necessarily with Africa. And it's really time to see how we can shift and change that dynamic. Why is this important? I think it's an important time for African history. More than ever, the world is looking at Africa for many different reasons. Market value of over $3 trillion, unprecedented growth and development, an abundance of resources, be they land, be it water, be it critical minerals and opportunities therein, be it the young, youthful population, be it a lot of the innovation that we see with young techpreneurs around the continent. There really is an eye focused on Africa. And there's many huge business and investment opportunities in food and agriculture, in climate and energy, in the digital world, and really, driving digital and technology opportunities forward. So many different areas that Africa can grow. It also will have the largest consumer market in the next couple of years. And I think statistics say 1 in 4 people by 2050 will be African. So I always say, if you're not betting on Africa, if you're not engaging in Africa for the future, you will be surely out of touch by 2050. And that's really what we're trying to seize and reshape a narrative around. That's GABI. Now, what is Unstoppable Africa? And you saw video clips of the flagship event of GABI, which is Unstoppable Africa. Every year over the last 2 years, we've gathered in New York to kick off a year of reshaping, of discussion, of mobilizing commitments, of driving commitments and driving financial commitments towards this reshaping narrative exercise. We will be meeting, as Rosemary said, in September 25th and 26th here in New York to kick off the third iteration of the GABI initiative or platform. Unstoppable Africa for us is a moment when, because the rest of the world is gathering here in New York, we too want to gather and bring together heads of state, as I said, African private sector, global private sector, investors and philanthropy to train their eye on Africa. And we convene just as the rest of the world convenes, but not focusing on the humanitarian governance and other challenge of the continent. We don't wish them away, we don't wash them away, but we recognize that amidst that, the private sector is truly taking a lead in terms of growth, job creation, and transition. So GABI's been born with a powerful realization with 3 years in. We firmly believe when Africa wins, the world will win. The platform itself aims to convene key stakeholders, to connect them for investment, business, and trade opportunities, to catalyze action, and really to convey and champion this refreshed narrative for Africa. We're focusing on five key critical themes this year in Unstoppable Africa and GABI: energy access and energy transition, inclusive growth and trade, digital transformation, the creative industry that covers arts, music, film, and fashion and sports. And I just, want to highlight some of the opportunities that we have. The first, if you look at energy, and I'm sure many of you covered the Africa Climate Summit, you're very much in touch with the discussions that are going on about the climate crisis and the opportunities for a green transition. The African continent, although is actually struggling in terms of access to energy and energy poverty, has the best and the most abundant set of green resources for this transition. And it's really possible, if you look at economies such as Kenya and Morocco and others, to see how both in Kenya, the issue is the opportunity there lies in geothermal or hydro generation. In Morocco, it's solar and building huge, massive grids to really transform how energy is delivered for the continent. Look at issues like trade. We're at the cusp of really pushing forward on the AFCFTA. What do we need to do to move beyond a pilot initiative of 8 countries to really get the continent to embrace and push behind the AFCFTA as the rest of the world too starts looking a little bit more inward in terms of regionalization? What are the opportunities for Africa to finally get its trade right? To look at issues like digital payments and currency, to invest in infrastructure, to invest in a sustainable SME chain to be able to drive trade forward. Digital, I can't speak enough of that. We're at the cusp of many things. On the one hand, many people actually simply don't have adequate access to digital. On the other hand, we see the highest ROI, return on investment, on smaller techpreneurs that sit in the African continent. Looking forward, we have all of the advances coming in tech, AI, etc. But we know the next 1 billion eyeballs, as the tech companies would say, will come from the African continent. How do we shift from being consumers of this digital content to being producers, and producers that produce content that is relevant for the continent, for our growth, and for the world? The creative industry, I think we just simply need to look at the fact that artists such as Wizkid, Sauti Sol, the whole Amapiano movement are selling out concert halls across the world. But are we really generating the revenues that we need and supporting music, film, fashion in the ways that we should? What investments do we need to challenge public and private sector to make on the continent so that revenues can flow in a way that makes sense for both the artists and for the entire management ecosystem? And sports, we're fresh off that fantastic win by Tobago in Botswana. We're seeing new sporting talent emerge from all around the continent. We saw the success of AFCON. What do we do? What do we need to have in place to invest in more AFCONs to demonstrate that sporting success doesn't only happen outside of Africa, it can happen on the continent? How do we create an ecosystem of sports management that actually may be, nurtured and grown on the African continent, and then partner with the other giants across the world? So many unstoppable opportunities, as we call them. And I think that's really about GABI and Unstoppable Africa.
Thank you, Sanda, for that awesome introduction. And thank you to you and your team for the great work, that you're doing with GABI. So at this stage, we'll take some questions. I don't know if there are questions already in the chat. Okay. I have one here. It says, how does Unstoppable Africa event plan to address specific challenges faced by African entrepreneurs, such as access to funding, mentoring, and global market connectivity? and what partnerships and collaborations are in place to support this mission?
Great, thank you. And thank you for that question. Very important because, we do want to be practical. As I said, we're an action-based and action-focused platform. And you're right. I think the African continent, like the rest of the world, is really driven actually by small and medium entrepreneurs. And we've surveyed them over the years. And what are their key challenges? The first is access to capital. The second is access to markets. And the third is sustainability or resilience. How do they build enough resilience to not get interrupted by shocks? A lot of these shocks are external. We saw them in the COVID pandemic. We see them when there's wars and conflicts. We see them when geopolitics impacts economies and the world at large. So, in terms of access to funding, I think one of the broader discussions, and let me start at the macro level and reflect on a great discussion we kicked off last year. It mirrors the discussion that is being held broadly around reform of the international financial architecture and really looking at what needs to happen for governments to be able to access the funding that they need to drive and invest in Africa's economic development. We know that a lot of the Bretton Woods institutions set up in 1945 are still operating an infrastructure that is out of date of the realities and the economic situations of many African economies. So at the global level, there is a concerted call. I'm sure you've heard it from the Secretary General, you've heard it from many African leaders and many others to really challenge that architecture. Why is it that African countries, when they need to borrow at that level, are paying back a 12 to 14% interest rate, whereas in the past, when different economies needed to borrow, it was at 2 to 4%. Why do we see countries sliding into debt? And we fully agree. It's not simply about borrowing and lending. It's also about responsible use of the resources that are borrowed and lent. But, even access to those resources becomes problematic, which means that down the chain, even at the retail level, the small trader who's looking for retail access to funding can't necessarily find it at an affordable rate. And it's really important to see how to address that. We convene. So we hope to bring together partners who are ready to invest and take a bet, for example, on techpreneurs, entrepreneurs, and startups. But we also continue to challenge, as I'm sure you probably heard in a clip, I believe it was President Ruto of Kenya talking, a fantastic panel that he had last year with Dr. Adesina of the AFDB and Mokhtar Diop of IFC, really calling and continuing to push that advocacy throughout the year around the need for that financial reform. Access to global markets, I think the key and how we position in GABI is first, let's see how Africa can resource itself. There's so many missed opportunities by not fully embracing our regional economic partnerships and obviously the AFCFTA as a continental trading bloc. Very important to see how we can strengthen first domestic trade. A lot of the challenges there lie in infrastructure, lie in issues such as tariffs, trade, paperwork, customs work required to trade across borders. Then we multiply those across, the nation states on the African continent, and it gets very complex. I remember about a year ago sitting in South Africa with a leading, retail chain, and they talked about the fact that, every quarter they file about 1.2 million documents just to ensure that all of their documentation is correct should they get audited for their trade within the SADC region. Now think about that. We could go digital on all of this. We could enhance trade and go much further. We could look at harmonization across the board or a number of tariffs. I mean, there's so much opportunity to look at that. So just to highlight the policy and the macro initiatives, but also being very clear that a lot of this is aimed at making a better enabling and business environment for the small and medium enterprises that really drive the African economy forward.
Thank you so much. Please keep the questions coming. We have another one here. It says, what is the long-term vision for Unstoppable Africa? And how does GABI plan to measure the initiative's success and impact on African economics and communities over the next 5 to 10 years?
Great. We're just completing a refresh strategy. We've been, going for about 2.5 years. We're just in the process of completing a refresh strategy with a long-term vision for GABI. And let me first say the idea, as I said, is for GABI to be an initiative. It's not a series of convenings. It's actually a platform where we aim to galvanize, all those who are interested in business, trade, and investment in Africa and link them to other ongoing platforms. I'm sure many of you attend other fora. I've mentioned we were at the Africa CEO Forum. There's the Africa Investment Forum, AFDB has its forums, Aprexim has its forum. We're all aiming for the same thing. But what do we do uniquely as GABI? We're able to convene heads of state at scale. We're able to convene private sector investors, philanthropy, and really take a multi-stakeholder, multilateral approach. For the long term, what we want to be. We want to be the premier platform that does this because we believe we can do it at scale. But we also want to be a platform that can catalyze investments. And that's why for us, being able to bring stakeholders together, being able to support partners who want to make announcements through GABI and hold them accountable for that work and develop work streams. And we're right now doing that, coordinating work streams among some of the partners. I hope you will all follow us and join us in September. Later in September, you'll hear more about this, commitments that are being made to help advance what we have identified as strategic investment opportunities for the continent. We don't do this alone. There's a wide range of partnerships, even within the United Nations, and more importantly, with a lot of strategic private sector leaders. So what will success look like for us? I think the first is continuing to be relevant and highlighting and showing a spotlight on what works on the continent, but also what doesn't. And as part of the what doesn't, it means being able to identify the opportunities, find the right partners to drive solutions, and trying to drive more public-private partnerships to address this. In terms of other things that we'd like to be able to measure is when we make commitments and when commitments are made by our partners and stakeholders, their financial commitments, their outcome-based commitments, what happens to them? You know, is the funding realized? Are the outcomes delivered? A lot of these are large and significant initiatives that probably take 5 to 10 years. We want to be around to be able to tell this African story. The third piece of success for us is being able to serve as a platform where those who are interested in Africa can come and see the best of Africa and these investment opportunities, particularly from a private sector lens. So we're very keen to be able to showcase that. That's why it's important for us to build our footprint on the continent and work even more closely with the African Union to help mobilize these success stories of Africa investment. But I just want to highlight, we continuously want to challenge the orthodoxies and challenge the places where we're stuck and really drive public-private dialogue on policy issues to help unlock, barriers to progress for the continent.
Amazing. We have another question here from Peter Oke, Energy Watch Online. It says, what is GABI doing to ensure that investments in Africa are secured, considering current political instability, insecurity, and corruption that have sent many investors back to their countries?
Very important. And, it's very interesting. It's, again, part of a global discussion. There's a fantastic session that is going to happen in GABI called Addressing the Prejudice Premium. A lot of the challenges that happen to the African continent are external. I'm not taking away from the fact that we do have on the continent our own internal challenges, war, conflict, instability, changing social and demography challenges that make it, difficult for long-term investments. But by and large, the challenge to which you speak to, Peter, is driven primarily by externalities, and a lot of this is how are African economies rated globally in terms of the perceptions, what do credit rating agencies give in terms of Africa? The other day I was at another forum where head of state mentioned that, yes, there is ongoing political strife within the Sahel. But interestingly, in his country, far on the east side of the continent, the credit rating fell the minute that there was a coup in West Africa at that point in time. And it just demonstrates to you the lack of robustness in the current credit rating approach. And I think that's very, very important. So the first thing is, again, to continue to challenge those orthodoxies. But at the same time, looking internally and addressing the realities of Africa, because we cannot achieve economic growth without addressing the political economy challenges. And that's why, even as much as this is a forum about the private sector, we call on heads of state, because there's 3 things that they must do, African heads of state, to deliver on this vision of a prosperous Africa. I think the first is certainly to be able to create that enabling environment for business to thrive. And that really includes political stability. It means inclusion of the private sector. It means making sure that incentives for the private sector flow in the right way. One of the bigger issues, if I pull out again globally, is that there are industries, for example, where the incentives, for example, might be larger in continuing to invest in oil and gas, for example, than investing in the renewable energy industry, which is really the future for the African continent. So incentives are important. The second, I think, is looking at opportunities to harmonize regulation or regulatory coherence. We will never succeed as an Africa that can trade with itself or do business with itself as long as we have incoherent regulation from country to country or within regional blocks. There's a lot to harmonize in terms of trade and tariffs, in terms of even issues such as digital payments, in terms of simple things like telecommunication infrastructure, etc. So that coherence and regulation is absolutely critical. The third, I think, is to look at issues that the AFCFTA is really trying to push around movement of goods, movements of people, movements of services that will allow us to really build that first, grow the perception of the continent, build that investor confidence, and then be able to be that platform. So 3 key things that I think, leadership needs to deliver on, from the policy level to the regulatory level, down to the building confidence. But at a macro level, I think we need to be able to confidently address the prejudice premium that I think a lot of African economies face.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sanda. We have another question here from Eli Akoko from Business Daily Newspaper, Kenya. And Eli says, Africa Continental Free Trade Area was formed to promote trade within the continent, but not much has been seen to happen in that front. How can GABI give it the necessary shot in the arm to accelerate trade among countries in Africa?
Ellie, greetings from my home country, and good to take your question. There's so much that needs to be done to push the AFCFTA forward. I think they've done a fantastic job in laying down a great framework, in laying down policies. We've seen advancement in their protocols on digital. We've seen advancement in their protocols for women, youth, and SME trading. Now what we need is the political will to really rally behind AFCFTA and get to the stage where we can learn lessons from the 8 pilot countries that have been trading with each other under this framework and move it to scale. What does GABI aim to do? I think, first of all, we've been a strong partner of the AFCFTA. We've always had them at our fora. We've been honored to attend their own fora as well and have spoken in, for example, a recent gathering that they had in Cape Town last year, and looking forward to welcoming the Secretary General, Wamkele Mene, at the event, as he's always attended over the last couple of years. For us, it's about catalyzing, private sector support momentum for the AFCFTA. It's about really creating a platform where those who are keen to support business, trade, and investment in Africa can see the promise of the AFCFTA. But for it to really pull together, to your question, I think it's really about what politicians, and entities such as the African Union can really do to advance this unified vision for African trade. Ours is to mobilize the private sector to show the opportunity. And I think a few years ago, we actually had a trader from Rwanda share about her journey in trading commodities across from Rwanda through to Nigeria, and how the AFCFTA facilitated that. But certainly a lot more needs to be done to bring it to reality.
Amazing. We have another question here from Otto Erie from Nigeria, this day newspaper. And he says, what impact would Unstoppable Africa have on the climate change issues being faced by the African continent?
Right. Climate, you may notice we're not necessarily addressing it as a key focus in our areas. We're looking at the corollary of it, which is energy. As I said, close to, I think it's 600 million Africans live in energy poverty or energy insecurity. The climate crisis has hit the African continent hardest. Again, we've heard it being echoed through the Africa Climate Summit, through a lot of the conferences on the climate conferences, and above and beyond by many African leaders and private sector. It impacts business, it impacts trade, it impacts supply chains, impacts obviously access to resources and opportunities such as agriculture as well. What will we aim to do around GABI? I think our approach, number one, is to demonstrate and to really echo what a number of leaders said coming out of the Africa Climate Summit. Africa must not look at itself as a victim of the climate crisis, but really must look at seizing the opportunities from the climate crisis. I mentioned earlier that the entire world is going to look at Africa for solutions for clean and green energy going forward. simply because, one, we have an abundance of natural resources, but secondly, in terms of the consumer market, the minerals that are needed to produce panels, other renewable energy solutions, batteries and battery storage lie on the African continent. So for us, it's about, again, highlighting the real opportunity, making sure that Africans are at the table when discussions are being held, either regionally or multilaterally, demonstrating the investment potential that exists to be able to drive this forward. A concrete example, last year, we had His Excellency President Tshisekedi of the DRC talking about, critical minerals in country. We hosted for the entire day the province of Lubumbashi, where they were working to, strengthen and solidify opportunities in partnership with one of our sister organizations, the Economic Commission for Africa, around really building capacity for battery manufacturing on the African continent. It's an initiative that will be driven by our sister organization, the ECA, but GABI provided that multi-stakeholder, multilateral platform for these discussions. And those are some of the issues that we'll do, because if we're able to generate clean, green energy ourselves, we'll be able to get far ahead of the challenges that the climate crisis wants to hold us in, but be able to look forward as to how we can then drive forward energy for manufacturing, energy for agriculture, energy to drive forward food, education and health opportunities as well, and create jobs, because that's absolutely important.
Amazing. Two more questions and we'll wrap up this session. We have one here from Business Insider Africa. And he says, has GABI had any events to engage stakeholders based in Africa? If not, are there any plans to do so?
This year earlier this year, we began our work on the African continent. We spent some time solidifying a partnership with the African Union. We think it's absolutely important to work in tandem with them. We were pleased in June, to be able to sign a partnership agreement with them to mobilize private sector in support of the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, the prime document of the African Union. So at that point, we actually also held a gathering of business leaders who were present. It had, for example, Dr. Benedict Arama, Prof. Benedict Arama, the president of Afrexim Bank. We had representatives from Google, from other key players on the African continent, to drive thought around what this partnership with the African Union can look like and what we need to do going forward. Earlier in the year in Kigali at the Africa CEO Forum, we convened multiple sessions, but a key one for us thematically was one that we convened again with Google, with the ministries of ICT in Rwanda, and with a whole host of key partners working in telecommunications, digital and financial inclusion around the opportunities of digital tech and AI for Africa. A lot of the outcomes of that meeting will play forward in Unstoppable Africa this September, and we'll see some very interesting announcements coming through on the digital tech and AI piece as well. So we have begun our work on the continent. Incidentally, the UN Global Compact also has 10 country chapters or country networks on the continent. We will continue to mobilize business and business leadership through those country networks. We also continue to convene at a global level and at a regional level and within country in support of Unstoppable Africa.
Amazing. Final question here, and this is from the business editor, Leadership Newspaper, Nigeria. It says, aside facilitating access to funding for SMEs, do you help these businesses scale through the hurdles post-funding to ensure that they grow into viable and a sustainable level?
So, and just to clarify, we don't necessarily facilitate partnerships in business. We're not a deal-making room, but what we know is we're very clear that when the right people in the room, and very interestingly, this Unstoppable Africa session coming forward, we will be featuring, for example, some techpreneurs who received some seed funding, but are literally going to do a pitch to be able to see if they can secure additional funding and support, partly just to demonstrate what is out there from the African techpreneur work. We're doing this in partnership with UNDP Africa through an initiative called Timbuktu. But above and beyond that, you talked about market access and other things like that. Our plan is to be able to highlight a couple of things. One, what these challenges are, because they must be addressed from a strategic policy and macro angle, because we can't continue solving for Africa issue by issue. Again, going back to issues of regulatory coherence and access to finance, what are some of the issues that we need to bring to the table for policymakers and for governments to see and understand and make those changes at that level? Above and beyond that, I think it's also providing the opportunity to showcase the versatility of the SME sector. And we see it. If you look at any global supply chain, there will be a link to Africa. Look at, for example, anything agricultural. There's many African economies that are exporting horticulture, agricultural inputs, cocoa, tea, coffee, etc. out. How do we build more opportunities for value addition at source? A lot of that lies also within the AFCFTA. It lies within a desire of African leaders to value add more at source, so that if we do export, we export finished goods at a higher value. It's about rebalancing the balance of trade and what that looks like for the continent. So for us, it's about pushing the policy envelope, but also highlighting the opportunities and the investment opportunities within those that we can gather together and take a look at.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you have heard from the CEO herself, and I'm very certain she has been able to answer all your questions appropriately. I mean, so much information there that she has given. Indeed, Africa will be unstoppable, when we all come together to ensure that these things, do happen. And please join us at the Unstoppable Africa event coming up on the 25th and 26th. Please register. We have the links on the screen. If it's not showing, please let's start showing that. And after this, we're going to send a press release with all the summaries of what Sanda just shared with us. And if you have any other questions, I'm sure Sanda is available to still answer them. So you send them through to us, and we'll ensure that we get those questions answered, for you. Thank you once again for joining. We encourage you to register and join, please. If you have any questions, again, you can reach out to the APO team. We'll also be on ground, we'll be on ground to share the press releases for day 1 and day 2, B-rolls, and any other information that you want from the event. So please register to join either virtually or physically. Sanda, thank you so much for your time. We know how very busy you are. We are so fortunate to have you here today. And thank you so much for the great work that you and your team are doing. I think this is it from us till we see in 2 or 3 weeks, September 25, 26, in 2 weeks' time at the Unstoppable Africa event. Thank you once again for joining.
Thank you, Rosemary, and thank you all very much to all of you for joining. Just remember, when Africa wins, the world wins. Thank you.
Thank you so